I read the law of the pledge again. When you lend your brother anything, you shall not go into his house to get his pledge. You shall stand outside, and the man to whom you lend shall bring the pledge out to you. This sermon is about the subtle and sometimes unrecognized manipulation of which we can all be guilty, and which can impair, although never destroy, the deepest freedoms of which the human soul is possible. In the New Church, we're delighted with the teachings of the Lord about freedom. They elevate freedom to a new level, showing how the Lord himself has a special care for it. All the laws of his providence spring from the principle that as far as possible, we should act from freedom according to our own reason. Now, sometimes human behavior and even speech should be curtailed for the sake of society, but the freedom to believe what you choose to believe and to love what you choose to love are deeply protected by the Lord. For centuries, people have been trying to take away these freedoms. Governments, for example, told people what they should love and told them what to think and made them feel guilty if they didn't accept all the details of a political opinion. For 70 years in the last century, religion was expressly forbidden in certain Iron Country countries, and certain freedoms were taken away. In one sense, it didn't work, was it? Many people, once the Iron Curtain came down, flocked back to the churches because they'd always wanted to believe. In another sense, it did terrible damage. People longed to be able to decide for themselves what to think, but they felt terrible pressure to conform. We love the teaching of the writings that faith is an individual commitment between a person and the Lord. Faith is an internal acknowledgement of truth, says the book on faith. It is the law of the divine providence, this also says, that a person should not be compelled by external means to think and will and thus to believe and love the things of religion, but should persuade and at times compel himself or herself to do so. Our text tells how we could break that law ourselves. In small ways, each one of us can do what governments and powerful church organizations or their leaders have done. Now, in biblical times, a person borrowing money would have to give the lender a valuable item as collateral for that loan. Often it was a piece of clothing. The lender could not come into the house of the borrower to take the pledge. He stood outside, and the borrower went inside, chose the pledge, and brought it out. Now, why is that so? In the literal sense, it was a matter of simple courtesy or kindness. The lender didn't walk into the other person's house and cast a proprietary eye over everything and choose his own pledge. He let the person choose his pledge. But in the internal sense, a lender is someone who teaches. When a person teaches a truth, or when he teaches a value, something of importance to him, he or she is not to enter into the mind of the other and ensure that the truth is planted in exactly the right place. The teacher speaks from outside, as it were, and the learner can decide how to respond or whether to respond at all. In the other world, a person's house represents his mind. The people in the same house, and particularly in the same room in a house, have very similar loves, and they think alike. If, however, someone with a different perspective of truth were to enter the room and teach, his sphere would be such that the others would be constrained to think and feel as he thought and felt. In heaven, therefore, people who hold differing views talk together outside the house, and then they're all free to have different opinions. Spiritually, we need to keep a respectful distance from the minds of those who see things differently. With all of us, there is a tendency when we have a point of view or when we feel something strongly to want to enter into the thinking of another person and to place our ideas just in the right place so that the other person thinks rightly about that subject. This is breaking the law of the pledge. The lender's coming into the house and choosing collateral for his loan. You see, we're all teachers. We all have certain values. We all have certain thoughts that are important to us. And we want to communicate them, especially to people we love. So we should. The problem is that we can get in the way of the Lord, how the Lord is leading those we love, by trying to ensure that the other person thinks and feels just the same way about an idea as we do. It's a persuasive temptation, and the excuse we are tempted to use is our very love and care for someone. That person is very precious to me, we argue. And if he or she doesn't see this truth or this policy or this value, his or her happiness may be harmed. I'm doing it for that person's good. A young woman meets the man of her dreams, but he's not a member of her church. She feels quite certain that he'd be much happier if he were. He would know all the truths that she knows and be led by them to a greater happiness. So she plans a campaign for his conversion. He finds himself invited to a place where specific discussions are taking place, and he finds that the particular questions that are being asked are questions that he himself has asked her. His beloved is especially kind if he has agreed with some idea that the church teaches, and more distant if he has not responded as he should. He's not unintelligent, and he knows what's going on, but he does love her and doesn't know how to handle the situation. You see, her love seems to be her excuse. There's nothing wrong with longing for someone to love and believe as you do, nor is there anything wrong with creating an environment in which he can learn about your beliefs. It is when we put an emotional pressure for a commitment or a response to the truth that the law of the pledge is broken. Parents do this as well. Now, when children are young, they should do it. They should have the responsibility to teach them what is right. But when the children grow towards adult age, they have to gently back off and allow the Lord to lead them himself. At times, parents are afraid because their children are being a bit rebellious, and so they try to find ways to ensure that they see things right. They put pressure on them in all the subtle ways that families can do. The clergy must be especially aware of this danger. People come to church to learn the truth, and are disposed to be affected by what they hear. It is possible for the minister to put pressure on members of the congregation to accept his perception of the truth as if it were exactly what the Lord is trying to say. If so, they hurt the sensitivities of the people and may interfere with their ability to see truth as the Lord would want them to see it. So how can we be successful in breaking the law of the pledge? The principle is simple. We get into another person's mind if we create feelings which temporarily remove his freedom. Fear is the most common one. The young woman who loves her fiancé uses the fear of her withdrawing her love to make him want to listen to the truth. The fear she inspires is an intrusion coming between his understanding and the truths he is hearing. He is tempted to accept them not because he sees in clear light that they are true, but because he doesn't want to incur her displeasure. Families sometimes use obligation. You owe it to me to think the way I tell you because of all the things I have done for you. A minister may use the fear of disapproval, suggesting by his approach that a person who doesn't think as he does is less of a Christian than he ought to be. There are other, more subtle feelings which we use. The main point is that by using inappropriate emotional pressure, we may take away a person's freedom to give his or her own response to a truth or a value that is heard. Now let's be clear, we're supposed to teach truths and values and opinions and politics to others. And we're supposed to teach it from affection. We're supposed to make the truth and the principles that it indicates delightful. We should communicate not just that an idea is right, but that it's good. We are quite free to communicate our own delight in the things that we believe in. If so, also, we should present ideas as well as we can, making the good arguments that support them. Also, always, however, especially with those we love the most, we're urged by the Lord to stand outside that person's mind, allowing that person the privacy to see the truths from the quietness of his or her own mind. The writings enable us to see why it is so important that this teaching is given. They say that if a person is taught the truth and allowed to reflect on it, if he's taught the truth, or she, and is allowed to reflect, then the Lord himself inflows into that person with a sense of that truth. And he, the Lord, creates faith. It is that inner influx which takes place only if the person freely responds to the truth, and that produces living faith. When someone else is intruding into the person's mind, the Lord is unable to produce this faith because the person's freedom is impaired. So take a young man who desperately wants the woman he isn't falling in love with to join his church. If he puts any inappropriate pressure on her, whether by arguing too freely with her or by putting her under emotional stress, then she may seem to accept his faith. Then the Lord has to undo that acceptance. The Lord has to undo her acceptance before she can believe anything. In his misguided intensity, the young man is making it impossible for the Lord to do the very thing that he, the young man, wants to be done. We learn to keep the law of the pledge when we realize that breaking it never works. It can't work because it is an inviolable law of the divine that no one can come to see a truth or a value except in a state of true freedom. So the Lord has to restore that freedom if it's interfered with, undo the damage that has been done before he can begin the work. But if we break it, we do hurt people. We make it more difficult for them to accept what may be true ideas. One beautiful series in the Word describes two different kinds of truth that people experience. The first is the one from outside. We learn the truths from teachers and from our reading and so on, from our experience. When we respond freely to that truth, then a second learning takes place. Then the Lord inflows from within, and the life of that truth flows down softly, gently into the mind. He calls the second kind of truth the truth of peace, a love for truth that descends from him alone and makes the things, and makes the things we believe in joyful, alive, peaceful. Breaking the law of the pledge spoils that second teaching. This is the faith that we want our loved ones to have. And that is why we keep the law of the pledge, so that of them the Lord may say, as the rain comes down from heaven, and the snow, and it comes down, and the snow from heaven, and do not return there, but water the earth and make it to bring forth and bud, so shall my word be that goes forth from my mouth. It shall not return to me empty, but it shall accomplish that which I please, and shall prosper in the thing to which I sent it. For you shall go out with joy and be led forth with peace. Amen. So shall bow your head for the blessing.